A cold wind swept through the park, rustling the brittle autumn leaves that clung stubbornly to the trees. The sky was a muted gray, casting a dull light over the quiet surroundings. On a worn wooden bench near the fountain, a man in a tailored wool coat sat motionless, his gloved hands resting loosely in his lap. His salt and pepper hair was neatly combed, his shoes polished to a mirror shine, but his posture told another story, one of weariness and quiet despair. He was in his early 40s, though the lines etched across his face made him seem older. People passed by, joggers with earbuds, couples holding hands, mothers pushing strollers, but none gave him a second glance. To them, he was just another man with money and time to waste, maybe waiting for a driver or escaping a boardroom call. He had the look of someone important, and yet, invisible. His name was Mr. Grayson, Edward Grayson, CEO of one of the city's most powerful tech firms. He owned several homes, a penthouse overlooking the skyline, and a dozen high-end cars. He had awards, stock options, and enough wealth to never worry about anything material for the rest of his life. But none of it mattered today. Not after burying the last of his family 2 months ago, his younger sister, the only person left who truly knew him. His parents had passed years ago. No wife. No children. No one to call his own. The wind picked up again, tugging at his coat collar. He didn't bother fixing it. His eyes stared into the distance, unfocused, as if searching for something long lost. A tightness pulled at his chest, not from the cold, but from something deeper, grief, perhaps. Emptiness. He didn't know why he'd come here today. The bench had no meaning, no memory attached to it. Maybe he just needed to sit somewhere where life was still happening, even if he felt like a ghost within it. The laughter of children playing in the distance barely reached him. The world moved on, oblivious. Tears stung the corners of Mr. Grayson's eyes as he looked down at the thin blanket in his hands. It was light, ragged, and barely enough to block the chill in the air, but the weight of the gesture pressed heavily on his chest. He had received luxury gifts from world leaders, crystal awards, gold-plated pens, but none of them had ever moved him like this. The girl stood quietly, shifting from one bare foot to the other, as though unsure if she'd done the right thing. She didn't ask for anything in return. There was no follow-up plea, no extended hand for coins or food. Just her gift, and a gentle presence. Grayson swallowed the lump in his throat and draped the blanket carefully over his shoulders, as though it were a royal cloak. He felt its warmth almost instantly, not from the fabric, but from her kindness. He looked at her again, this girl who had nothing but still chose to give. "Sit with me a while," he asked, his voice quiet but sincere. Her eyes widened slightly with surprise, but after a brief pause, she nodded. She climbed up onto the bench beside him, tucking her legs up and wrapping her arms around her knees. For a few moments, they sat in silence, the noise of the city a distant hum behind them. The wind still carried a bite, but somehow, it didn't feel as harsh anymore. Two strangers from two very different worlds sat side by side, sharing a moment that felt outside of time. No expectations. No status. No judgment. Just presence. Grayson glanced at her out of the corner of his eye. She was watching a squirrel hop across the grass, her expression calm. He wondered how someone so young could be so strong. He, with all his wealth and influence, had crumbled under the weight of loneliness. And here she was, alone, cold, possibly hungry, yet offering comfort to someone else. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a CEO, or a public figure, or a man defined by what he owned. He simply felt human. Seen. Understood. And for the first time in a long, long while, he didn't feel quite so alone. They sat in silence for a while, the sounds of the city softening around them. The sky had darkened slightly, the air cooler now, but neither of them seemed to notice. The thin blanket wrapped around Mr. Grayson's shoulders rustled gently with the breeze, and he held it tighter, not just for warmth, but for what it represented. Eventually, he turned to her and asked softly, "What's your name?" She hesitated, as though weighing whether it was safe to share. Then, almost inaudibly, she replied, "Lila." "Lila," he repeated, letting the name settle on his tongue like a forgotten song. "That's a beautiful name." She gave a small shrug, not used to compliments. "My mom picked it. She said it sounded like music." Grayson nodded, sensing a tenderness behind her words. "Where is your mom now?" Lila's gaze dropped to the ground, her arms wrapping more tightly around her knees. "She passed last winter." His heart sank. "I'm so sorry." She shrugged again, but this time, it wasn't indifference, it was survival. "I tried to get into the shelter, but it was full. They say I gotta wait. I don't like begging. People yell or look away like I'm not even there." Grayson felt a sharp pain in his chest. This child had faced more than most adults he knew. He nodded slowly and looked out over the park. "I know how that feels," he said. She looked at him, puzzled. "You?" "I'm alone too," he admitted. "I have buildings with hundreds of rooms, homes in different cities, and more money than I know what to do with, but none of it feels like home anymore." Lila's brow furrowed, her young mind trying to make sense of what she was hearing. "You're rich." He nodded. She tilted her head, studying his face. "But, you look sad." A soft, sad smile tugged at his lips. "That's because money doesn't keep you warm like this blanket does." She blinked, unsure if he was teasing. But his eyes were sincere. She looked at the blanket between them, the one she had given away without a second thought, and for the first time, she smiled fully, bright and true. It was a small connection. But for both of them, it was everything. The morning sun broke through the clouds, casting soft golden light over the park. Dew clung to the grass, and the world felt cleaner, quieter. Mr. Grayson stirred on the bench, the tattered blanket still around his shoulders. He looked to his side. Lila was curled up beside him, fast asleep, her small frame tucked tightly into her hoodie. He watched her for a long moment, something inside him shifting, gently, but profoundly. She stirred as the sunlight touched her face, blinking herself awake. "Morning," she mumbled, rubbing her eyes. "Morning," he replied with a smile. "Hungry?" Her eyes lit up cautiously. "A little." He stood and extended a hand. "Let's get some breakfast." "My treat." Her hesitation lasted only a second before she took his hand. They walked together to a nearby diner, where Grayson insisted she order whatever she wanted. She ate slowly, savoring every bite. He barely touched his food, more focused on watching her finally experience something that should have been ordinary, but wasn't. Afterward, he made a series of quiet calls from the corner of the diner. His voice was calm, firm, decisive. He arranged for one of the children's homes he funded, places he had once only written checks to without much thought, to open a space for Lila. Not just any space, but one with warmth, care, and dignity. He made sure of it personally. Within a week, Lila had her own bed, clean clothes, a warm room, and a place in a school nearby. She had counselors who listened and adults who cared. Every so often, she would look at the new blanket on her bed, soft, heavy, and warm, but still remember the old one she gave away without hesitation. As for Mr. Grayson, life began to shift in quiet but important ways. He didn't return to his corner office the same man. The tattered blanket she gave him now sat neatly folded in a glass case on a shelf behind his desk, next to his awards, diplomas, and CEO plaques. But to him, it was the most valuable item in the room. Whenever meetings felt hollow or profit seemed like the only thing people cared about, he'd glance at that blanket and remember the cold bench, the barefoot girl, and the quiet voice that asked nothing, but gave everything. Because kindness, he now knew, is the richest gift of all. He sighed quietly, almost inaudibly, and lowered his gaze to the ground. That's when he noticed a small pair of feet, bare, dirty, and still, standing just a few steps away. And then, a soft voice broke the silence. "You look cold, mister." A small shape moved into his blurred vision, slow, cautious. At first, Mr. Grayson thought it might be a stray dog or a pigeon, but when he looked up, he saw her. A young girl, no older than 10, stood a few feet away from the bench. She was barefoot, standing on the cold cement path with feet that looked red and rough from exposure. Her clothes were threadbare, a thin hoodie with frayed sleeves, a skirt too short for the season, and leggings full of holes. Her face was pale, smudged with dirt, but her eyes were sharp, curious, and quietly kind. She said nothing at first, just looked at him, tilting her head slightly, as if trying to understand why a man in such a fine coat looked so sad. She clutched a small backpack tightly against her chest, faded pink with a broken zipper. It looked far too light to hold anything of value. "You look cold, mister," she said finally, her voice soft and shy but clear. Grayson blinked. He hadn't spoken to anyone all day. The sound of her voice, so unexpectedly gentle, felt like a warm crack in the frozen silence around him. Before he could respond, she pulled the backpack from her shoulder, knelt down, and began to rummage through it with small, nimble fingers. After a moment, she pulled out a folded, tattered blanket. It was thin and worn, the color of old snow, with fraying edges and tiny holes scattered across the fabric. It looked like the kind of blanket that wouldn't warm much, but probably meant everything to her. "You can use my blanket," she added, holding it out to him with both hands. He stared at it, then at her. The gesture stunned him. His throat tightened. This girl, clearly homeless, clearly in need herself, was offering him the only thing she had for warmth. No hesitation. No pity. Just kindness. Her lips curled into a small, shy smile, as if embarrassed to offer something so meager. But to Grayson, it might as well have been a gift wrapped in gold. He took the blanket slowly, with reverence, as if accepting something sacred. "Thank you," he said hoarsely. The girl nodded, pleased. In that moment, the world felt a little less cold.